All right. Well, good morning. Thank you, folks, for joining. My name is Casey Van Veen. I'm the Vice President of Global eDiscovery here at Lighthouse, and welcome to our 57th webinar out of about 100. Totally kidding. I think we put about 4 on thus far. But if you're anything like me, I'm sure your inbox has been bombarded with the request to join for CLE and multiple webinar requests as we enter this 3rd month under quarantine. So thank you truly for investing an hour of your time with us to talk more about how you can effectively manage your intellectual property during a COVID RIF. So today, as you join us from your pajamas and the comfort of your own home or your favorite tracksuit and your cup of coffee, we promise that today's topic is going to be ripped from the headlines. I'm in California, and many of our local tech companies have unfortunately announced major reductions in their workforce as a result of COVID-19. So as a result of that in their business, this is very much a hot and heavy topic. So today is not going to be focused on e-discovery or how to be a better e-discovery practitioner or how to be more effective from working from home. I think we can all agree that those topics have been done in great length. So we really want to be laser focused on today's topic. Just a few quick housekeeping items. And what we'll do is if your hair's on fire and something bad happens and you got to jump away, no worries. We're going to be, you've registered for this session. So we're going to share with you a quick link at the end so you can hear this. This orange icon here is our chat box, so you are on mute. So if you've got a great question, we'd love to hear from you throughout the presentation today. Go ahead, drop us a quick note, and I will try to thread that in to the conversation. In addition to that, as a reward for offering up a question, we're going to enter the folks into a raffle. We have 3 cool prizes to share with you for the folks that do enter questions. And then for those of you looking for CLE credit, please stay to the end. There's one quick question to answer. That is your golden ticket. So very quickly, from an agenda standpoint, love to kind of share with you where we plan to take you here in our 1-hour session with you. We're going to give you just obviously some brief introductions of our esteemed panel, talk a little bit about COVID, its unintended effects, talk a little bit about the theft of IP, what types are we seeing being stolen, how to detect it, what are some mechanisms that you can put in place, the life cycle of these different investigations. If you don't have a whole lot of time and you need to TRO somebody immediately, what are some ways to quicken that life cycle? And then what are some proactive measures that you can take back to your team, whether it be the folks in IT, legal, or compliance, on your next Zoom or Microsoft Team meetings that you can share. And then we'll do a quick wrap. With that, I'd love to go ahead and introduce you to our esteemed panel, and I'd love to start with Mark Lewis.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Casey, for the introduction. My name is Mark Lewis. I'm a lawyer here in San Francisco. About 8 years ago, I founded a litigation boutique. We now have 12 lawyers practicing in the San Francisco Bay Area and in the rest of the country. We specialize in complex litigation of all shapes and sizes, but we do also have a specific specialty in trade secrets and employee mobility. We represent plaintiffs seeking to protect their IP, as well as defendants who have been accused of stealing IP, whether that's a corporation and individuals. So we kind of cover all aspects of the spectrum there. Relevant to today's presentation, we've seen a lot of our clients, even in the last month, having to implement some of these large-scale RIFs, including those you've read about in the news. So, it's obviously a very challenging time for organizations, and we're looking forward to discussing how we can help.
Hey everyone, I'm Jerry Bowie. I run the digital forensics practice here at Lighthouse. I have a team of about 20 examiners and investigators. I'm based out of Dallas, Texas. But my team does more than just the ESI collections for e-discovery. We also do forensic analysis, and we're also provide expert witness testimony. I work remotely. My wife is a cosmetologist, so I have the benefit of getting my haircut at home. I did get my haircut for today's session. It's been about 2 months, so I'm pretty happy to get all dressed up and looking nice for the session today. So look forward to speaking with y'all.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. So Jerry, can you kick us off with some facts and figures on how COVID-19 is changing the way we work?
Yeah, I mean, when we look at these facts and figures, I want to make sure that we kind of relate it to the not just the business, but also the folks that are experiencing RIFs. So it's kind of looking at it from two perspectives. And when we say RIFs, it's the reduction in force, so big mass layoffs. So let's go to the next slide here, looking at things from the impact on business. And during this COVID-19 era, there's just extra pressure on businesses to keep the bottom line healthy. And sometimes that means doing these periodic waves of layoffs or these RIFs. And in March, it reached a pretty high number, largely in leisure and hospitality, but you could see the impact across different sectors here. And those numbers are just accumulating at a high rate. Can we go to the next slide? And so when we look at it from the employee's perspective and kind of the unemployment rate, it's been steadily decreasing, which is a good direction. So if you look at that chart on the left-hand side, ever since the Great Recession in 2009, the unemployment rate has been steadily getting better. But with COVID-19, it's taken a spike. It's, I think, gone in March of 2020 from 3.5% to 4.4%, nearly a total 1% hike in the unemployment rate. And what's being predicted here in 2020 is that we could suffer a 32% unemployment rate. And that's higher, if you look at this, higher than in the 30s during the Great Depression. So we're not talking about the Great Recession in 2009, but we're talking about the 1930s where we were experiencing in excess of 20% unemployment. We could be at a total 30% unemployment. So that's a significant impact on the on the employees and the job market. Next slide. So
quick question for the folks out there in our audience. We're going to conduct a quick poll. Are you experiencing RIF today? So we just have three answers to this question. A, I am currently experiencing a RIF at my company. B, I know of someone in your small sphere of influence undergoing a RIF. Or C, I'm unaware of any RIFs currently going on. So if you quickly answer that, it's going to be on your right in that chat area. And then we'll give it maybe, folks 10 seconds to answer, and then the system takes about 20 seconds to compile the answers and give us some data here. So I think we can safely close the poll, Kate. All right, so not a lot of folks are going through it, which is, at least for the folks on the call, which is great, but we do know of quite a bit of it. I suspect that this is a tech-heavy audience, so I guess that number's not too surprising. Mark or Jerry, any thoughts on those poll results?
Yeah, I mean, I could speak for myself from a forensic analysis perspective, and the departing employee programs that we already support, kind of on a ad hoc basis, are starting to get a lot more momentum. So we're hearing about these risks, and we're hearing from clients, corporations that are concerned about, these risks. So, they're trying to think what to do proactively. There's a lot of devices that are being put on shelves, and they want to know how to repurpose those devices, what the lift is going to be, the level of effort to do kind of these preservations en masse. So I'm seeing a definite heavy pickup from our tech clients.
So Jerry, in relation to that, anything you can share on why IP theft is on the rise right now?
Yeah, I think it's a numbers game. I think there's some percentage of folks who, get separated from their company who do take information with them, despite all the training, despite the exit interviews cautioning them to do otherwise. They do take things with them, and they might not consider them as IP theft. They might be the authors of a lot of these, PowerPoint presentations, even things, innocuous or seemingly innocuous, like a client contact list. They'll take that with them, thinking that they have, complete rights to doing that. But, it goes through a scale of proprietary and confidential information, to IP theft and trade secret misappropriation. Mark can definitely speak to that better than I can, but I'm seeing a definite uptick around those categories.
Yeah, I would say my experience has been completely consistent with yours, Jerry, in terms of the uptick in the number of inquiries from both plaintiffs and defendants in the recent weeks. Unfortunately, can't talk about specific examples, but that's certainly on the rise. In terms of why, I think one big reason is the lack of presence in an office. I mean, we'll talk about this later, but one of the best prophylactic devices to preventing IP theft is a rigorous in-person exit interview. And it's a lot harder to conduct a rigorous in-person exit interview when you're not in person and when you're trying to implement a number of layoffs simultaneously. Just logistically, that becomes very difficult to do. And I also think there's an issue with inadvertent retention of information post-employment when you're in a climate where everybody's all of a sudden depending on their personal devices and using a BYOD policy to have their work to get done. And so it is a bit of the Wild West right now in terms of where data is and what people are doing with it. And so because of that, I think we're seeing just massive increases on the IP risk.
So Mark, a question just came in from one of our attendees saying, what is different about COVID RIFs from a standard RIF?
That's a good question. I think, as I mentioned, I think that the scale right now of the COVID RIFs are larger than we've seen before. I mean, looking at the slides that Jerry put up, I think the RIFs that are being implemented are amongst the companies that are affected are so large that a lot of those companies, first of all, may not have the most rigorous methodologies in place to ensure the protection of their trade secrets. And then just implementing all of those en masse while everybody's out of the office becomes incredibly difficult to do. And then with everybody remote from the get-go, I should say, when the RIF is even first contemplated, it then becomes very difficult, I think, and I think Jerry can talk about this more later, but it becomes very difficult to start to get into the process of where is all of the data to begin with. And then I think one other risk too is that one particular red flag is when an entire group of employees leaves, right? The entire group that's responsible for a standalone product or have some value as a group that's greater than they are each individually. And so when particular divisions or silos or verticals are moved or dismissed, that can be a big risk factor.
And Mark or Jerry, another question that popped up on this topic, can you share an example of inadvertent IP theft by a departing employee?
Yeah, Mark.
So many examples, but Jerry, go ahead.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head, Mark, is when and especially in this work from home environment, so we're talking about how COVID-19 RIF is different from a normal RIF. In the environment where you're already working from home and there isn't a formalized exit process, or at least you can't do it in person. You can't on site on a Friday afternoon ask an employee to surrender their badge and their laptop and any other devices that they have in their bag or in their desk, right? It's already left the premises. Right, that ship has already sailed. Everything is sitting at home, so it's not really collecting the devices on the employee's departure on their way out the door. It's how do you get them to surrender this this information or the storage devices that might contain this intellectual property in a kind of cohesive way. So we have a client right now, especially because their offices are closed. And we're considered essential legal service support during this time. They're actually having their employees send everything to us. So we're getting not just the laptops, but we're getting manila envelopes full of of stuff. And a lot of them are taking a guess at what they need to surrender and what they don't need to surrender. So that kind of fuzzy understanding around, okay, what belongs to me and what belongs to the company, especially since you're not sitting face to face and having kind of an immediate feedback from the exit interviewer. They're just kind of taking a guess, and not to mention things that might be stored on home computers that might have been, worked on during during shelter at home. But even prior to that, prior to COVID-19, is those remote situations where you often forward an attachment to your personal email account, and then the employee's working on that from their home computer, where it's much more comfortable with a large monitor, and then forgetting that all of that stuff was stored on those personal devices, thumb drives, et cetera. So kind of, if you don't have training around good data hygiene to begin with, making this massive shift to a work from home scenario only exacerbates the potential, or increases the potential for data being stored in the home environment. So that's where kind of inadvertent IP theft might occur.
And specific examples from my practice, I mean, there's so many examples of inadvertent IP theft, I think both before, during, and probably after COVID-19. And they run the gamut from, anything where, like Jerry was mentioning, someone forwarding an email from their work account to their personal account so that they can then access it reasonably during their job, to do their job, and have access to it more fulsomely. The age-old example is the sales rep who's on the road all year, constantly going from one presentation to another, and has a PowerPoint deck that she's presenting to a number of different participants, and then that it's just easier for her to keep it in her Google Drive, because it's just a lot easier to get to than jumping through the VPN and doing all that and doing under the pressure of putting a presentation together. The sales executive leaves, she still has that presentation deck in her Google Drive, and that's illegal, and it's confidential. She didn't do it on purpose, and now that might be on a USB stick that's in her possession. It might be in her Google Drive. It might be on her desktop. It might be on her husband's computer. It may be all kinds of places, and then you got to remediate it, and that's inadvertent. Another one, famous classic example, very difficult to remediate, photos of whiteboards. Right, so you've got everybody in a room, talking about a product or an idea or a plan, and it's a very easy thing to do to take a photograph of the whiteboard so that you have access to it, and then everybody's very good about wiping off the whiteboard and making sure that all the information is gone when they walk out of the room. But if there are 10 people in that room, everybody now has a computer in their pocket with an image of that plan. And who knows what's going to happen to it? If it's on an iPhone, it might get backed up to iCloud. It might get synced with the person's personal iCloud account. It might then get backed up to an external hard drive. And so it needs to be a clinical process, right, where you look at every step and see where that data may have gone. But again, that's the example where it's completely inadvertent on the employee's part. So I do think there are a number of examples of inadvertent retention, and that is going to increase in this work from home environment.
So Mark, we're going to advance to the next slide. I have a quick question for you. So in my practice, I'm seeing a huge shift, and that shift is away from traditional litigation, folks litigating, and a huge increase in litigation and investigations around the theft of IP. I'm wondering if you can kind of talk about the categories that you might be seeing this drop into, or how that's affecting your practice and your clients.
Yeah, and I can speak to that on both sides of the aisle. I mean, I think, again, one of the things that plaintiffs, and when we talk about who is a plaintiff in a case like this, it's the owner of the data, right? It's the employer who has gone through the departure, and the question really then becomes, what is the objective, right? Is the objective to punish the person who's left? Is the objective to reclaim the data? Is it to send a message to other employees that may be leaving? Or is it to obtain an economic remuneration, Or is it some combination of all of those things, which is usually what it is? It's a sliding scale, and you got to assess, which is more important. So to your point, Casey, it may be that one reason you're seeing a little bit less litigation is because litigation is expensive, and it doesn't always result in getting the trade secret back. And so what you might be seeing is, other mechanisms of enforcement, and especially, I think, a quick strike, that says, hey, look, it looks like you took this. We know about it. You ought to give it back. A lot of times that approach works a lot better than, unfortunately, if a lot of time passes, the problem only gets worse. And so I think that's the importance of like a sort of a quick strike approach.
Sure. So on our next slide, we talk a little bit about the economics of it. How do you both see it affecting our clients' bottom line?
Jerry, you want to take that, or I'm happy to?
You can start with it, Mark.
Yeah, and so I think, I doubt for any of our audience members that it's a shock that a trade secret is expensive. Trade secret litigation is expensive. The litigation itself is expensive. The remediation process can be very expensive. I can't tell you how many cases in which it's come to the realization of all the parties that the litigation about the trade secret is far more expensive than the value of the trade secret, right? And so, that piece of it is expensive. And, we have some slides in here to make sure that you all get CLE credit and some statistics on that. But, the filings are up, the litigation is very expensive, forensics are very expensive. And so it just becomes a big challenge to try to tackle those problems. And it's going to get worse, like we've all said, in this current climate.
Yeah, the value from my perspective, being a certified fraud examiner, is always kind of estimated. If this is kind of ongoing IP theft or ongoing fraud and misconduct, an organization can expect about 5% of their overall revenues to be lost to this type of activity. So while we're talking today about, the departing employee and what they take with them during that kind of critical 2-week period where they're planning the departure and either they're resigned or they've been let go, what are they doing during that 2-week period? But again, if it's more kind of endemic and it's happening during the course of their employment, that type of IP theft, that ongoing kind of hoarding of company information could lead to, 5% or higher of overall company revenues. It really depends on the type of IP they have access to and they're taking. So right now, our program is heavily focused on the departing employees, and of course it's salient for this COVID period, but it's also important to do onboarding of these employees too, to make sure that they're not infiltrating IP from their former employers. So those corporations that are really kind of cognizant about this and or may have been bitten in the past are doing the onboarding evaluation of employees, not just the departure, but the onboarding. And then, again, talking about this more kind of consistent loss during the course of insider threats and the type of IP that employees might be stealing during the course of their career, it can be pretty serious if it goes undetected and there isn't a good program around preventing it.
Yeah, and I just want to touch on one thing you mentioned, Jerry, because I think it's a really good point. I mean, obviously the scope of our presentation today is the risk when implementing a RIF, but I also think it's important to note, I have a lot of experience conducting mass scale onboardings. So a company is going to bring on a lot of people all at once, and they want to make sure that everybody that comes, likely they're coming from a competitor, and they want to make sure that all of those employees are clean, that they're scrubbed, right? That they don't have any confidential information from the previous employer. Much like a robust in-person exit interview process is important, my experience is that an in-person robust onboarding interview is almost even more important, where you essentially put on a different hat and cross-examine your own clients, people, to make sure that none of them have the confidential information that your company is afraid of bringing on. And so that process is a long interview process that I believe is done best in person. And it's going to be harder to do that in a work from home climate. It's just, you get a sense of the seriousness of the truth of a person. It's just going to become much harder to do that remotely.
Yeah, and I think one of I think it's directly related to COVID RIFs, actually, because it's not just the departing, it's those departing employees, departments that are let go all at once, where you might find that those employees are colluding or, perhaps putting together a better package deal for the next employer, right? So if they are going to a competitor, they might say, hey, look, we can bring an entire team. You might have a turnkey department that you can launch here with not just the people, but what we know and potentially what we've taken with us. So, in order to mitigate that risk, like in a COVID environment where not just people are leaving, but being hired for competitive reasons, could be bringing this intellectual property along with them. So extremely relevant for the topic today. So this slide, this is where we're kind of arriving at here, is this perfect storm, right? So it's not just the layoffs, but it's also the work from home setup where IT is relaxing their policies. And I threw this in here where it's a Simpsons cartoon where it says, hey, wait, so your remote work plan has every corporate machine externally accessible on RDP? It's those companies that don't typically let their employees work remote, so they had to really react to the situation and some demands from very important employees like, the software engineers or sales folks or executives that are now working from home are demanding access to resources, IT resources that were previously secured by IT, but now all of a sudden the IT is getting pressured to really, bring down those firewall restrictions, and then allowing folks to work from home exposes them to increased levels of IP theft because the flow of that data is going to be increased and potential cyber risks too, so outsider threats in addition to insider threats. And that's kind of the vulnerability or the risk that we're running right now in terms of decreased defense on IT networks.
So Jerry, a question just came through. A lot of these companies are now announcing that they are not going to renew their lease and they're going to go 100% work from home. So how do you manage that twist when you kind of put your forensic mind around one of these investigations and typically you're going for the video camera that saw them walk in at a certain time or their key card that got swiped? That's no longer something we're going to go after. So how does it affect your investigation?
It affects it dramatically because, in a cooperative scenario during an investigation, you would expect the employer to also provide us with different data sources that might help triangulate the bad behavior or the misconduct. So looking at just the data and on a laptop is one perspective, but you want to layer on those other key bits of information, like you said, the badged access, the video cameras, the closed circuit cameras, where you can mine that information for timing across a chronological investigation timeline to say, okay, we suspect based on the forensic artifacts on the laptop or in addition to the router and firewall logs, in addition to the badged access, those are all things that we can formally rely on, which are going to be, diminished now in a work from home environment, right? We're going to be much harder pressed to ask for, the ring footage from someone's front door to the extent that it's relevant, right? We're not going to be able to, it's already hard enough to get cell phones, BYOD evidence off of, personal cell phones. Imagine trying to ask to go in and collect all of the, thumb drives and external USB drives and personal workstations and, anything else from individuals' homes. It's going to be so much harder. So I do recommend or advise that policies be rewritten or, extended, and then the additional training around data hygiene. There's some forensic tricks that we recommend around that because you can't eliminate entirely employees who are working from home to use personal devices. Instead, create that folder, on the file system or create an entirely different profile to log into on your personal device so that you can point the forensic investigator or the examiner to say, hey, collect everything from this profile or collect everything from this folder, or even if you're using a personal email account, I've diligently stored all of my work material in this folder on my personal email or personal cloud storage so that we can be targeted with our collection and those representations can be validated. So those are some recommendations that I have based on my experience.
Awesome. So I know we're on this next slide here, the reactive response, which is typically the position we're in. I know we've done some nice programs with Mark to be proactive and scrub folks on the front end, but most of our clients don't always have that that nicety, if you will, and we're coming in on the back end. Let's say we've got bad actors, not actors, but bad actors in this RIF. What should our clients, at the corporation level, what should they be thinking about?
Yeah, in addition to those recommendations I just made, they should be coming up with a plan, right? And so, being familiar with what a typical forensic, kind of examination looks like. We have something called the red flag report, which we'll get into later, but understanding the types of exfiltration vectors helps. I know that's a fancy word, but, a lot of us are familiar with data leaving by USB drive or email attachment or personal cloud uploads. Being familiar with that, and also, in a large RIF situation, you want to make sure that the departing population isn't feeling, upset or vengeful, and they could not just take data, but they could destroy data. So that's a bullet point on here too. Something I've seen where on their way out with, these relaxed IT scenarios, they could go in and delete everything off of a share and cause a lot of problems for companies. So, and then it's all the monitoring in between that I would recommend. But more so often working in a reactive environment, I think we just need to think a little bit more proactively as some of these remote situations might become permanent.
Sure. Kate, on our next slide, we're going to talk about different categories of IP. Maybe you can talk about the ones that you're focused on.
Yeah, I think for today, absolutely, we're going to be focused on trade secrets, and just to be demarcating trade secrets from the other sort of flavors of IP, patent, trademark, and copyright. We litigate in those spaces all the time, but that's not really the risk here. The trade secret is really just in its essence is information, and the legal test, whether we're talking about California or federal or wherever the case may be, it's generally the same, right? It's some information that derives independent economic value from being a secret, and that the company tries to keep it a secret. And so it can be anything, it could be a customer list, it could be source code, it could be PowerPoint presentations, it can be almost anything really that falls into those buckets. But I suspect our audience is fairly well versed in what a trade secret is and how to litigate that. But we can probably move on to the next slide then.
Sure. Any famous quotes you have, Mark, when talking about clients about protecting their IP?
No, I wish let me think about that as we go. And it's more of an attitude, right? I think that's rather than a quote. I think it's, a lot of clients don't care if the information can have an independent economic value, especially if it's something that's core to the company. And that really can often drive the rationale and the analysis. But yeah, that's that. And so to Jerry's point, I think what we're talking about is prophylactic, preparation, what a potential plaintiff could do to protect their trade secrets. And so, I think that especially now, it's important at the first step for the company to determine what the trade secrets are that they're concerned about. For example, you could have a tech company that's very concerned about its core product base, but you could have layoffs within or RIFs within, let's say, the accounting group, and people take templates for expense reports. People take things like that because it's going to make it easier for them to do their job in the next iteration. Now, that's ostensibly the theft of confidential information, but what value does the company ascribe to that? And is that important? And is that going to get caught up in the same, either red flag reporting or sort of, information gathering that's going to be done to make sure that people don't take anything, right? And so that's, I think an important goal for the company. And then, like Jerry was mentioning, limiting access to authorized individuals, tracking that access, and educating people on inadvertent disclosures and taking steps to minimize those inadvertent disclosures. Somewhere we can help is, ensuring that the contracts are as strong as they can be, whether that's within the individual employment agreement or a document that's signed in the exit interview process, potentially along with the severance agreement, NDAs, any sort of electronic usage contract or anything like that. And then, as I was mentioning before, as much rigor with the offboarding process as possible. Obviously the handoff can be rushed. It can be challenging to do remotely. The exit interview process may not even occur. And then the forensics piece, I'll give over to Jerry.
So maybe, do you want to move next slide, Kate? We can talk about, how we're dealing with this kind of stuff, critical steps.
Yeah, and that's great. I think that's I kind of touched, I think, on most of those items already. Just in terms of the objectives, the remaining bullets really concern litigation. Once you're in litigation, that you select the forum, you plead the claim, you identify the trade secrets, you have to establish use, right? That's where inadvertent disclosure can sometimes be an issue, right? Because then you have evidence of theft, but not evidence of use, which you have to prove if you're going to litigate the case. But, all of this is later, right? This is all once we decide to litigate and once that's out on the table. I think what we're thinking now is focusing more on, how to prevent the theft in the first place and take the initial steps to prevent that. Because hopefully you don't get to the later pieces, but if you do, that's the analysis that you're going to be wanting to running.
Yeah, for the critical steps and forensic analysis, and for the forensic perspective, is you'll find a lot of departing programs might involve IT copying what we call the user-generated files, so the My Documents folder and the desktop, and storing that on the network somewhere. That's not enough to help kind of ascertain the overall behavior of the individual, during this type of investigation. So you can't tell if the employee, for example, what websites they browse, the USB plugins, of course, if they deleted anything, after downloading it and putting it onto the USB drive, did they delete anything en masse? And then, there could be ghost images of those files on the hard drive, but you don't pick that up during a typical kind of IT exercise for preserving user-generated documents. You got to have you have to have a forensic image of the asset, and so that means using the right tools, using the right expertise, especially if you're going to reach a point where you need expert testimony around the methodology and you want to defend the process, making sure it has a sound forensic process and those things were followed appropriately. So, all those things involving the right, the right person and the right tools in order to surface those forensic artifacts later for a written report and some expert conclusions.
Yeah, and even before we move on to the next slide, I think the other piece to this is that if we're focusing on, let's say understanding our client's objectives, for the lawyer, for outside counsel, my personal view is that you ought to know what the whole trade secret case is going to look like before you do hardly anything, even send a demand letter. So unless it's very clear that there's just a little bit of inadvertently retained information, and you can send the demand letter on that basis, I've seen way too many cases where a company has jumped the gun, filed a lawsuit, tried to get out there with a TRO, and then their own forensic work, whether it's in-house or through an expert, reveals that either the theft wasn't what they thought it was, or there's no use, or there's just really no way to plead a case, and that runs into problems with regard to, pleading a trade secrets case in good faith, first of all, but that's sort of the worst case scenario. But then you also just have an enormous waste of resources for the company. And so my view is always to try to see the case, envision what the case is going to look like through to the end as much as possible, get as much forensic work done on the front end as you possibly can, know what's going to be lurking around every corner before you get there, and don't let the horse of litigation drive the cart of the analysis, because that is a terrible problem. And then you have stakeholders on either side get entrenched, and then you get deep in litigation, and that can often be a situation that you can't recover from.
So Kate, on our next slide, I can kind of tee this up. So often, Mark and Jerry, unless a client has experienced one of these, they may do things inadvertently, trying to be proactive, trying to get ahead of it, not understanding that they might be actively destroying really nice pieces of forensic evidence. Any war stories either of you can share about the importance of forensics and what clients have done in the past that might have negatively affected their cases, even though they had the best intentions?
Yeah, I find that a lot of companies can't resist the urge to go kind of looking for themselves. Right? So when there's a risk of IP theft, they'll go and they'll turn on the employee's computer, and they just want to go look at email. They want to go look at the documents they have, and by doing so, they're kind of stepping forensically all over that device, leaving their own footprints and perhaps destroying some evidence or invalidating the findings because the right methodology wasn't followed. So, one of the biggest mistakes, even from a forensic analysis and e-discovery perspective, is having the company themselves kind of collect that evidence into a folder. So what you'll find is this is important, so they'll copy paste all of that into a folder and maybe zip it up for safekeeping, not realizing that they've destroyed the metadata, and they've overwritten some potential important artifacts that, sometimes there's limited space where these artifacts are stored, limited space and time, and so those can be overwritten as well in terms of link files and other really key artifacts. So, doing that, while the intention is good, not taking a forensically sound approach at that stage could really hurt the case.
So let's change gears here. So now let's talk about, we actually know we have a bad actor. And I think, in the 10 years that I've been in this business, I've seen the reporting go from these large, 15, 20-page, multi-bulleted reports where you need to Google every other term to understand what's going on. The client saying, hey, look, I want to be able to digest this investigation in 30 seconds. So Jerry, can you kind of talk about, what we're doing out there and what the industry is trying to do to make this, forensic speak and forensic reporting a little easier for our clients to digest?
Yeah, I think sometimes they're initiated because of the role that the departing employee is in, and there might not even be a lead, but just from a comfort perspective, not knowing what you don't know is kind of a risk in and of itself. So this red flag reporting that we devise and a lot of other forensic shops are doing is trying to create a template around important things to look at least at a first pass perspective. Next slide. And so again, it's trying to help counsel determine or giving them key evidence to make these demarcations around the type of potential exfiltration. Let's go to the next slide. We kind of hit on this already, but want to talk about what is included in our red flag report template. And this is largely around the more typical types of exfiltration vectors. So we do look at cloud storage, we look at email, the USB removable device, large files. So I talked about this a little bit, where the malicious actor might go and zip up a specific folder. So it's going to be gigabytes inside, so it makes it portable, download it to the local hard drive. So large files on disk is key. There's certain applications that they might be using, so they might be trying to hide their tracks. There are some available out on the internet to our chagrin, but there are tools out there that really attempt to permanently delete those ghost images that are available after any kind of deletion activity. We do our typical Google search and the browsing history as well. So these 8 categories comprise our red flag report. And next slide. And we apply this to a whole process. So when we talk about the life cycle, that initial kind of top row for defend the process is going to be where the objective scan is performed. And once we do a readout on observations and findings, there might be some there because we risk score every single one of those categories and review those findings. And if the score is high on a scale of 1 to 10, if it's, if a couple of those categories are approaching 10, it might justify a more deep dive investigation. And that's where we move into the analyze and opine stage here on the bottom row. So that's going to be much more, hand-holding and a lot more targeted, analysis. And so hopefully we can derive some more important evidence for the case. Next slide.
So Jerry, sometimes your work can take between a week or 2, depending on how many devices you're asked to look at. Mark, as someone who's receiving these reports, you're antsy. You want to get your hands on this as soon as possible. You don't always have a week or 2 to wait. So maybe we can talk about how we're trying to speed up this process a little bit.
Yeah, you can imagine that, with that kind of laborious, approach, that analysis takes time, and you can manage that in a normal environment where you're just looking at specific individuals. If you're talking about COVID-19, you want to do this at scale. You want to do those objective scans at scale. And so there are solutions that we're beta testing right now where you're not taking a forensic image, which can take time. You're not extracting from a forensic image all of those key artifacts, downstream and then analyze. And then there's some turbo solutions that can run over the web. So you can connect through a web browser to the machine and just lift some of those important registry artifacts or some of those things on the file system that you can evaluate immediately. And then while it might not cover all 8 of those red flag report categories, we can get an immediate picture within hours, not within days, but within hours of the risk. And that's going to be a precursor for us to do the next stage, which is the red flag report, and then the deep dive. So there's something developing within our industry to do quick ECA, early case analysis, with these type of tools that are available to us. And while it might not provide the complete forensically sound approach, it's something to give clients like Mark to understand what the level of risk is, especially across a much larger population. You might understand what to pursue first. It allows you to prioritize, and then you can go into the more involved steps that will provide the defensibility.
Yeah, I mean, from like a more lay perspective, I think it makes a ton of sense to be hand in glove with forensics right from the beginning. And yeah, to Jerry's point, if you have a key employee that's left and they can run a quick search of their Google search history, and there's a search for how to delete information, or one of the brand names for one of the many sort of data deletion programs that are out there, then we know that, right? And so we can get a demand letter out right away that says, this is the activity we saw. We know you're in possession of this, that, and the other thing. Our analysis is continuing. We reserve all rights, but we're on to you, and you ought to stop. And then that can be the first stage. Obviously, the full forensic analysis can come simultaneously or then occur later if it's necessary. But then it allows the plaintiff, the owner of the data, to stop the bleeding, and ideally, remediate and cure the problem without litigation, because that's where things get expensive and difficult and people get entrenched. So, it is incredibly helpful to hear and learn about all these different tools for early case assessment, early fact gathering, because Casey's totally right. Time is of the essence. I mean, that is literally one of the elements to getting a temporary restraining order, is that absent immediate relief, your situation is going to be damaged. And if you have a couple of nuggets like that you can take to the court, like say, these are the 4 things we saw in our preliminary analysis, and that they're really plain English so that a judge can understand them, because that's surprising how often that doesn't happen. I think that the more plain language it can be, and shown to the court that there are some things that were taken and why that matters, that's a key analysis to do right away.
So Jerry, how can we scale a program like this? I mean, what's your roadmap for as this continues?
Yeah, definitely. So if we do have turbo solutions in place, and we're getting early case analysis, and we're applying risk scoring and risk ranking techniques, we can start to proactively prioritize. I mean, so the RIF doesn't have to happen just yet. It could be, if it's being contemplated, with this browser-based collection approach, you can gather that information up front without kind of disturbing or alerting the custodian to the fact that you're making a forensic image of their drive. And some of these key artifacts can be analyzed en masse, as a matter of fact. So let's go to the next slide. And this is where I'm kind of getting into the ongoing continuous compliance monitoring. So when we're talking about the bookends of onboarding and offboarding approaches, it's everything in between, those critical timeframes in between, and you could be doing it on an ongoing basis that will help give you intelligence around your risk. So let's go to the next slide. Let's go to the slide after this too. I know we're running short on time. But this dashboard here should illustrate what what we're envisioning here from a proactive continuous compliance monitoring perspective. So if you can collect these artifacts and risk score them, now you can look at things, look at the trending around it. So while you might have the policies in place and the training in place, there has to be some enforcement. The enforcement has to have teeth, and so that means getting these artifacts analyzed and looking at things, kind of aggregating it from a office perspective. So if your client's a multinational corporation, or you yourself are a multinational corporation, you're in that compliance, internal audit, or enterprise risk function, a dashboard like this will help understand through a heat map perspective that, okay, they are actually in this office in Singapore, they're actually violating our USB device policies. And so that's going to be red, right? And whereas another country or another office in Southeast Asia, they're really complying, right? So that's going to be more of a cool color. And so, in this kind of high level, immediate kind of scan of a dashboard like this, you can understand where your hotspots are geographically. You can understand where your hotspots are across departments, across product lines. You can look at, the seniority of employees that are violating these policies. And then once you've kind of looked at it from that perspective, you can put things on a scatter plot and know the exact individuals who are presenting the highest risk, and start to use a program that investigates at a deeper level or substantiates these findings at a deeper level on a periodic basis, every quarter, looking at the top 10 high-risk individuals who are violating your policies across these different categories that really kind of, in totality, define your IP theft risk, right? And that's what this whole thing is structured around in terms of our departing employee monitoring solution, and what these turbo type of collections will help aid, because now you can do things at scale. This could be addressing a RIF, a COVID RIF, but also, looking at continuous monitoring at scale as well.
So I think we are at our last slide. So I know I've got 2 questions that have been teed up from the audience here. And maybe you guys can both take a stab at this, but what is the method of data exfiltration that are you seeing most oftenly used today? Jerry, you want to go first?
Yeah. So traditionally, it used to be USB device plugins. Those thumb drives they're so easy to hide, right? So you plug it in, and while you're told as an employee not to copy any proprietary information to it, it's just so easy in a departing scenario during that 2-week period to go ahead and copy things, especially with storage capacity that those thumb drives have nowadays. That used to be the most common way. That's still common today, but what is really trending upwards is the cloud storage. Especially, you can imagine in a home environment where you feel like you're outside of the monitoring purview of IT, you can upload things to your personal storage account. That's just as easy, if not easier, nowadays. So I'm seeing that as a more common method of exfiltration.
Yeah, totally agree. Cloud storage of every single flavor: iCloud, Google Drive, Dropbox, Box, you name it. You know, that's all over the place. I think both on purpose and inadvertently. Those are it's by far and away the highest method. And then to loop into that also, you know, the photo backups, iCloud, you know, that's also sort of, it's a cloud-based exfiltration. But yeah, USBs are out and cloud is in for sure.
And then another question that came through for each of you: can you share what the average cost is for one of these types of investigations?
Yeah, for us, on the initial red flag reporting, that objective scan, we do have a flat fee around that. So it's going to be easily per device, sub 10,000 for sure. And depending on the device and depending on the artifact categories, that can range between $4,000 to $6,000 flat fee per device. Now, again, if you're doing this at a COVID RIF scale, that's not tenable and not advisable, by the way. We would recommend a turbo solution, which is going to be a much lower cost, a much faster turnaround time because of that. The nature of or the amount of labor that's involved is going to be a lot less. But we do have, and in support of the risk scoring, some algorithms, automated algorithms that are currently in development that should generate on an initial scan those scores automatically. And so, again, just kind of taking this in an evolutionary, more efficient way towards quicker turnaround times. So that should aid in a more objective scan. I mean, that's by definition what we want to accomplish here is what are the routine things that we look at in order to come to our initial observations, while the second stage, more deep dive investigations, is where we're going to have much more of the subjective expertise in looking at these things. So hopefully much lower cost as time goes on and as more things get automated.
Yeah, which then results in lower costs for outside counsel as well. I mean, the elephant in the room, right, is that an organization implementing a large-scale RIF may not have a robust budget for either forensics or outside counsel. And so where the rubber is going to meet the road for in-house legal is, you know, to make sure that it makes sense from an economic perspective to do this type of work. And I think the early case assessment coupled with, you know, a light touch from outside counsel, if any, frankly, to make sure that, you know, everything's protected is incredibly advisable at this point.
Awesome. Well, I think that wraps up the questions from the audience. I'd just like to thank our panel. You know, a lot of work goes into this, and we weren't rushed. We ended literally right on time. So to our audience, thank you for the great questions. To Mark and Jerry, thanks for investing some time and being on the panel with us. I hope everyone has a wonderful rest of their week and a nice long 3-day weekend. The link to the question is coming up here shortly. So please answer that for your CLE credit. And we will get our fun prize pack out to our 3 winning question submitters here shortly. So thank you all. Here's the link on your right-hand side in that chat box area. Go ahead and click on that. That will drop you to the easy, no-brainer question, and you'll get your CLE. So thanks, everyone. Have a great week, and we'll see you soon back here on Lighthouse Illumination Series. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Casey.
Thanks, Mark. Thanks, Jerry.
Thanks.